Hey guys, let's talk about this week's episode of Rain. And it was a good episode. It wasn't great, but it was good. So we continued with Mary still being engaged to Tomas, and we're waiting for King Henry to basically release her ties with France and let her go. So there's like, some bow and arrow duel offs between Francis and between Francis and Tomas, and a lot of like chit chat as to who's basically the better guy. So the thing I found very awkward in this episode was how quickly Tomas went from good to evil. It was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in an instant. And last week he was so charming and he was sweet, and he was basically talking about how much he admired Mary. And then in this episode he was basically like, "You're my property and you're going to do what I want." And it was kind of like, "Whoa, where did that come from?" It was very out of left field. So I was kind of like, okay, well, we could have done a slow build to this. And Francis is convinced that, Tomas is an evil guy, that he may have murdered his wife back in Portugal. Like, just all this weird stuff where we in the last week's episode, we didn't get any kernels of, that Tomas was not maybe a stand-up guy. So for it to have all like just been so completely, you know, he's evil and he was proving it. I mean, the man literally had a whipping boy who he smacked in the face quite a few times. So, I don't know, it just kind of came out of nowhere. And obviously Mary was afraid of him, but she was still willing to marry him for her country. So, it was just, I don't know, I just felt a little bit rushed. So basically, Francis and Bash spent the episode trying to prove that Tomas was a horrible guy, and we find out that Tomas was actually the one who tipped off England to let them know that Bash and his men were on their way, and so it's basically his fault as to why Bash was injured, and he did this so that he could swoop in and basically protect Mary and save her country and marry her. So it was all of his plan, and they tried to frame another gentleman who was from England into basically being killed this episode. So, they were pressed for time, and Mary and Francis and Bash were all basically trying to prove that Tomas was no good. And finally, there's this huge standoff between Tomas and Francis, and it's kind of comical actually. Like they were going at each other with swords, and this definitely isn't Game of Thrones, and they're not wheeling and dealing with their swords. So it was a little comical, but it got the job done, and Tomas ended up dead. And they basically told, I guess, they made it sound like he was got into a hunting accident, and that is why he ended up being killed. But, they get back to the castle, and they save, just in time to save the Englishman from being beheaded. And it's a great scene. And then even Mary uses this whole incident to stand up to King Henry and basically say, "Listen, I'm going to marry your son. You're going to give this to Scotland, and you're going to give that to Scotland." And she basically negotiates a better treaty for them. And it's pretty awesome. It shows, again, that Mary isn't just some like wallflower who's going to sit back and not stand up for herself or her country, that she was promised a deal between France and Scotland, and that they need to live up to it. And basically, King Henry nods and agrees. So it's kind of cool. And of course, Queen Catherine is not pleased because Nostradamus is still sticking to the fact that Mary is going to cause her son a world of hurt, which means death. So, Lady Catherine wasn't too involved in this episode. However, she did go toe to toe with Mary and was basically like, "I don't like you," and Mary was like, "I don't know why you don't like me, but we're basically gonna have to get along," and that's that. So it was kind of like a really awesome scene between the two of them, and I'm hoping that we're gonna get more of those types of head-to-head battles, because Mary knows that Lady Catherine, our Queen Catherine, is not her biggest fan, but doesn't quite understand why. So in the B storyline, we had Kina, who's basically the Mary's lady in waiting, and she's been hooking up with King Henry for the last few episodes, and then this one he wants to basically deflower her. and she wants to, but she's scared and she's nervous, and she basically does like the whole back and forth push pull thing. And he says he'll wait for her and all this, and it's just like, okay, dude, you have a husband. I mean, you have a wife, and you have a mistress. So do we really need more? And I guess he does. So they have this, a couple of really good conversations about it, and then she finally gives in at the end, and she's just like, be gentle, and he's like, I will, the first time or something like that. It's like, because these ladies in waitings are supposed to be like in their mid-teens, and it's kind of gross, but these kings get to basically have whatever they want. So Kina basically loses her V card to King Henry, and then we'll see where that goes, because now she's decided she's okay with being a mistress, and we'll see how long she wants to keep up that game. And then we had Lola, who was tending to Bash's wounds. And there seemed to have been some flirting going on between the two of them. And he was all like, oh, don't leave me. My day is so much better when you're here. And I'm like, wasn't she just like in love with Colin? I think that was his name. The one who basically got killed because he tried to poison Mary in like the first episode. So she seems to be rebounding quite quickly. I don't know if I'm feeling it, but I do know that I do not want to see a love triangle between Bash, Francis, and Mary. And I know that that's sort of how it seemed it was going to happen, and I'm sure it's going to continue that way. But, Lola being a distraction for now, I guess is fine. It's harmless, so it doesn't really make a difference. And then we got to the end of the episode where Mary, who was feeling much better about her standings in the house, I don't want to forget this part, because Mary and Francis are definitely getting a lot closer. And they had a great scene. They both snuck off into the woods, and she had a blanket, and they basically were having a great conversation. And she's basically saying she doesn't want to have to marry Tomas, and that she wants to keep her deal with France, and he obviously doesn't want to lose her, and you can tell that he's really starting to get feelings for her. And they have a couple of really wonderful kisses, and they're making out really passionately. And it's a really nice moment, because at the end of the day that this is the union that is actually supposed to happen, and Tomas is just was there inconvenience, and obviously he's the one who set it up. And Tomas finds out that obviously Francis has been asking all these questions about him, and they have like a really intense scene, but obviously this is before Francis basically guts him like a fish. So, but that was a really nice moment that Mary and Francis had, and I hope that we continue to get more scenes like that between the two of them. So at the end now of the episode, again, Mary's pretty pleased with how her standing is in the house, and she starts talking to that ghostly figure that we keep kind of seeing in the shadows, and that's been helping her out of late. And she ends up basically saying thanks for your help, and you're not alone, kind of thing. And then she goes to bed, and then the camera pans down, and there's somebody under Mary's bed. Very creepy. We have no idea who it is, and she's like, the person's wearing like this thing over their face, and they were actually shooting into that earlier at the very beginning of the episode when Francis and Tomas were doing their little bow and arrow duel, and they were shooting into this thing, and that's basically what was hiding under her bed. So it's kind of creepy, and we didn't really get any explanation, and it just went to black. So I guess we'll find out more about what that's all about in the next week's episode. So a good episode, a couple things out of left field, but still pretty decent. So that is my review of Reign.